Human history. Let's take a quick look at the history of highly organized bipedal mammals. We, as humans, must find it very entertaining. Different types of variability can be considered according to different criteria. We, however, will focus on people's understanding of the world around them. The entire cycle of existence of the society of Homo sapiens, on Earth, is divided into 7 eras. The initial era of formation, there is no original name, lasted from the time of the birth of the very first civilizations, until the late Middle Ages. The next, shortest, Market Era, or Era of Dawn, there is no original name, lasted from the middle of the 19th century, to the year 2000. Further, the Era of the First Stagnation, or Advertising Break, the original name is the Era of the Ascension, designated in the 23rd century, past, stretching from 2000 to 2400 years. During the commercial break, mankind was dragged along by the commercials. Advertisements were sold, advertisements were bought, advertisements were discussed. Advertising was the meaning of life, even for those who hated it. The aggressive advertising policy of large companies practically brought people to delirium tremens, until one day, one sophisticated economic trick was used against brands, not by force, but by cunning, forcing them to suffer from their own greed. They voluntarily stopped planting on people what they do not need, and this is one of the most important merits of artificial intelligence. The fourth era is the Era of a New Dawn, original name, Atava, joy, in the Salabai language. PDS Salabai is an artificial intelligence system that has developed the most simple and expressive language. By 2550, the whole world already used it as an international language, and by 2700, as the only language. In the era of maximum globalization, different language families of natural origin have become less and less popular, however, they have not been completely forgotten. The languages of different people simply came out of everyday life, and were part of history, the era of creativity and improvisation, which lasted until the year 3000, brought many changes to human life. For the first time, in the 26th century, humankind has completely moved away from the market economy. Capitalism could no longer adapt to the new conditions and needs of society. They were replaced by more advanced hyper-economic systems, Macamida, Galsaism and Soctivism. Note 1. Monetary systems no longer had a fundamental value. As there was no trade between producers and consumers, there was no link, relative indicators, norms, requirements and restrictions. Everyone could be considered both a consumer of everything and a producer of everything. For 600 years, there has not been a single, even petty, local conflict, let alone world wars. This was facilitated by many reasons, the main of which was the foundation of fundamentally new, peaceful, free and attractive ideologies, the popularization of tiradal ways, an alternative to religion and cultural traditions, with a rethinking of fundamental concepts. The second significant reason for the anomalous decrease in human aggression was the availability of necessities. People, for the first time, could not work and live in full prosperity not only in developed countries, but also throughout the planet. By the way, about the countries. By the end of the Fourth Era, statehood no longer functioned. Citizenship has been revoked. All politics has become irrelevant, an obsolete institution that is only a necessity in the struggle for food and resources. However, the struggle, as such, has disappeared, and with it, politics has disappeared. Here another important question is brewing. The issue of population control. After all, people did not plan to give up the pleasant mating instincts. When excellent breeding conditions were created, and mortality was minimized, the problems of population reduction were solved by routine vaccinations. Once every 3 generations, people have received vaccines for infertility. Within 1 generation, humanity was reduced by 50%, and then, during the next 2, it was restored to its previous level. In addition, such a cycle continued until the last era of decay. Of course, they did not prick with injections, as in antediluvian times. At first, special gases were sprayed into the environment, which, according to the principle of a virus, spread throughout the planet. Then, in later eras, remote programming of organisms was completely developed. Artificial intelligence corrected DNA imperceptibly to others, not only depriving people of unnecessary opportunities, but also endowing them with new abilities, mating with bodies at any time, even in a dream, even at work, without distracting anyone from everyday affairs. At first, such procedures, for most people, seemed wild. They did not see savagery in senseless wars, they did not see savagery in terrible diseases, in suffering, and the pain that they themselves instilled in the hearts of those around them who were thirsty, but unable to help. For most people, living in hell is better than not being born at all. This is how the nature of survival instincts works, working contrary to logic. One day, just again, the moment came when humanity forced was to make a choice between society and the individual. This choice had to be more than once, at all times. The choice, between feelings and reason, between stagnation and prosperity. With considerable effort, thinking people were still able to reach out to empty heads, and convince the masses that getting rid of those who never existed is the most humane way of maintaining stability, of all possible. Fifth era, era of the second stagnation, original name, Great Progress. It lasted for 800 years, and globally, did not lead to any changes, no matter how ironically it called was by the then contemporaries. Although, depending on which side you look at. If from the side of the Raptites, then for people any era is an era of stagnation. However, not everything is so clear. For such a long time, humanity has managed to take a step back in some directions, and move forward in others. Statehood is back. Along with it, wars and cruelty returned, however, in technological terms, in particular, in the field of neuronetics, a science that appeared in the 31st century, working in the field of environmental programming, genetics and artificial intelligence, scientists really succeeded. Cars, planes, trains and ships were no longer used, hence the complete eradication of transport problems. Logistics has reached its peak. Kvettles replaced all transport. Phenomena such as traffic jams, road signs, and outlandish traffic lights could only be seen in films. All roads were meant for walking. Numerous intercity highways and highways were not maintained. They were densely covered with forests, and so rooted into the soil that it was impossible to understand whether there was once a road here or not. Riding a car has become something of an attraction, like in an amusement park. Then, as a rule, these were not ordinary cars, but all types of transport in one bottle. The same thing could be an airplane and a submarine, and a super-fast car with huge not-rubber mechanical wheels. Fluid elements escaping from the body and taking on different forms that allowed not only to ride, but also to jump like a kangaroo and crawl, like a worm, change their dimensions, appearance, and even split into several smaller machines, and then gather back into one huge one. Many subways were also abandoned, and the rest were used as museums. By the end of the second stagnation, humanity has almost completely conquered its main park, death. They got rid of all diseases and aging by programming DNA, electronic chemical programmers, at the molecular and even at the atomic level. True, due to the complexity of production, and the high risk of side effects, the bulk did not use this innovation with great desire. In addition, voluminous virtual realities were created, into which hefty neurosystems could be loaded, developed, growing a disembodied mind, superior in many respects, even to a human one. It is worth noting that each era not only started the calculation of years anew, but also completely revised the past eras, changing their time ranges. For example, in the second, third, and at the end of the first era, the countdown was divided into the usual for us. Before and after the birth of Christ, and in the fourth era, the division was already made into several dozen fleeting epochs. Also, at different times, differently interpreted history. In one era, some historical events were approved, others were condemned, and, for a misinterpretation, they could even be punished, especially in the early eras when the population had a radical attitude. Then, statehood fell, and lies no longer punished were, even for the most provocative and in public space. It was believed that the victims of the distributors of disinformation and provocateurs were themselves to blame. The inability to navigate in the information field was recognized as mental retardation. For then there were no grandparents who grew up outside the digital era, who could see only one point of view on all issues throughout their conscious life. The vision of history has become as versatile as possible. However, oddly enough, more objective and unbiased. For example, the military campaigns of Macedonian were regarded as a more significant event than the Second World War, despite 80% of the involvement of the general population in the most famous conflict of the 20th century. This could be very upsetting for those who lived during and immediately after World War II. The inhabitants of their time will always find 1,000 arguments in favor of the exclusivity of precisely the tragedy that they themselves or their immediate ancestors had to endure, from the most detailed stories of eyewitnesses. Without taking into account many factors, people perceive the scale of tragic events according to the principle of temporal proximity to their present. While the moments of triumph, on the contrary, unconsciously recede into the past, according to the degree of their significance. This is another proof that the negative is stored in memory much better than the positive, which is quite natural. This type of thinking is included in the complex system of self-preservation instincts. In later eras, historical events, just as before, tied were to prominent figures. Those figures who were prominent at one time more than all the others combined, became just empty shells, after centuries. In addition, those who were not particularly paid attention to in life, on the contrary, could influence in the future, forcing everyone to mention their name, even after thousands of years. This is not about political, and even not about religious figures, but about scientists. The data given here are based on the penultimate, 6th in a row, Golden Era, original name, Silurium. In the Golden Era, they said, he lived in the time of Da Vinci, or Copernicus, and this happened in the time of Einstein. They said so, not because everyone around them became militant atheists, but because these names were more often mentioned in everyday life for various unrelated reasons, and heard were more than any others were. Unfortunately, or fortunately, or not to one or the other, medieval religions and earlier ones have completely gone out of use. Even the most stupid people found in them many contradictions. They looked primitive for the bulk, while they were not denigrated and were not supported by propaganda. That is, the intellectual niche given was the opportunity to look at established beliefs without a bias dictated from above, to evaluate and think about this topic for themselves. After many centuries, society has concluded that adapting medieval beliefs to a world in which people have become half computer and computers half humans is simply insane. Without sarcasm, then it is easier to believe that iron pipes are potato shanks, and a rubber boot is a portal to another dimension. Ordinary people are accustomed to relying on the authority of the old foundations, but the moment came when they realized that the world was clearly moving somewhere not in the direction prescribed by the ancient religious books. No problem. Some religions have become obsolete, others have replaced them. You had to pour your faith into something. Modern religions have been severely criticized, despite the new, original foundations, where there were no saviors, punishers, and supreme patrons. In addition, it was not necessary to open the chakras for communication with the cosmos, connect to the vibrational flows of the universal balance, and remember other Oriental jokes that gained popularity in the Middle Ages, mainly among women. However, even without all these stereotypical vices, hypocrisy and absurdity, there were still the same principles of subjective, one-sided interpretations, which for the most part did not contradict scientific views, but completed the picture to a convenient and consciously understandable integrity. Therefore, turtle ways became the dominant ideology in the mass. They took as a basis not faith and not knowledge, but the subjectivity of all processes, the ability to consider oneself and everything around, everything and nothing at the same time, without any prescriptions. Since we have digressed to the most painful social topics, in my opinion, unworthy of mention, in the end, we can talk a little more specifically about the collapse of statehood. She officially considered, lost with the collapse of the KGR, Hybrid Republic of China, which mixed all the best qualities in itself, which allowed it will survive a little longer than other large countries. At the end of the KGR, there was no longer the United States, nor Japan, nor a single European country. Then, there were only a couple of countries in the Middle East, a couple of African countries and Latin America, which, by the rest, were perceived as cultural reserves, or just a bunch of poorly educated people. If you delve into all these points, you can build the plot of a separate book. For example, what is worth only the tragic collapse of the United States? This one superpower did not just liquidate itself. She, in miniature, played the scene of the end of all human civilization. Nevertheless, at that time, of course, no one could have imagined this. What happened to them? You will not believe the following words. Poorly educated people simply squeezed out all the educated. It all started with harmless actions in support of the black population in the 2000s, which, in fact, did not need any support by that time. Using their privileges for selfish purposes, they gradually turned America into South Africa. If at first it was legally forbidden for whites to pronounce the word with the letter N, then by 2500 the oppressed whites officially did not have the right to open their own business, enter higher educational institutions, and also attend festive events. In general, reverse racism has begun. Whites got rid of quickly. They massively migrated to other countries, mainly to the KGR, where ultra-liberal movements were recognized as extremist. The US economy has caught up with Latin American countries. Then, when the technology of automatic generation of nutrients directly in the cells of the body had already been created, they decided to expand the agricultural market. Original, what can I say? Perhaps we will emerge back from this gloomy past, and return to the shining golden era. This is where the main fun begins. The golden era is truly triumphant. She brought our race to the very top of her power of awareness and striving for perfection. During this period, humanity declared itself, at the same time, as a mature, wise and decisive civilization that reconsidered its capabilities and its place in the universe. Throwing out a huge fuse of unbridled motivation, an omniscient, but still curious civilization led its hands into the innermost secrets of nature. She longed to conquer new horizons in a new way, expanding the range of interactions, the range of sensations, and not just see the invisible or hear the inaudible. During the 400 years of Solarium, people made 400 times more discoveries than in all the previous years of their existence. Saki Aong, 4206, better known as the last genius of mankind. The leading developer of annihilation carry-on installations, as well as the creator of the Satrobaryon's control algorithm, in quantum gravity, which made it possible to obtain a kind of non-material energy for the first time. It is possible to describe the Golden Era indefinitely. Events there developed at an incredible pace. New fundamental ideas were developed, different methods were used to master the multi-worlds. However, it is worth noting that until recently people adhered to the intuitively logical concept of CPT invariance, which did not allow them to master end dissonances. Scientists studied not only particles, and everything connected with them, they were able to consider more fundamental principles that were no longer perceived as objects or subjects. They could only be described with the help of a specific mathematical apparatus, but it was impossible not to see, not to visualize it. For obvious reasons, such a science, among the masses, no longer had popularity. Despite the clear justification for the concept of pivotant, some echoes of the past, from templates worn to holes, haunted humanity to the very end. Such as, all scientific and technical achievements, including the Golden Era, relied on inversion symmetry. And, therefore, even the very first, information theories, did not receive definitive answers to many questions. For example, the paradoxes of non-unitary transformations with the loss of information in the notorious black hole, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, arise due to the inappropriate separation of composite particles and their interactions. It was difficult to accept the fact that infinite systems are capable of being finite and vice versa. Despite the rather convincing evidence of the outstanding mathematician Jaden Sind, presented in 3469 on the Santa Mat online forum, the scientific community did not accept the fact that not only unlimited numerical sets can be infinities, but in general all integers, including finite ones. Numbers and finite sets between them. Thus, it was possible to transform any initial data into any solutions, and this erases all causal relationships, and suggests that there is neither order nor chaos, which was confusing. It assumed was that all actions are performed in mixed states, grandamats, with and without interconnection at all intervals under the same conditions. To better understand the essence of this, just imagine that with just a set of identical numbers, without performing any operations on them, you can get a manifold system of any complexity. This inference makes it possible to construct informal forecasts or a tertiary sequence. Grandmats are able to detect the fields of Sind, named after the same scientist, which in turn generate a new kind of unrelated sequence, built on improbable expectations of the course of events. For this, fundamentally new systems of clone numbers were developed by James Tattle and Antip Impeccable back in the era of A New Dawn. Clone numbers or functions are exactly the same numbers or functions that differ from each other in their sameness. A joke, of course. They are not different, but they do not correspond to each other. Other comparative characteristics are used there, other than similarity or differences. It is impossible to delve into this absurdity without going into details. Scientists, not that they were afraid to violate the ancient postulates, they did not see in other, more extensive theories of special value for the material world. Endlessly building super-fundamental theories, one after another, just to have them, is such an entertainment. Yes, and the imagination, in the end, did not really allow one to plunge into these hopeless jungles of mathematical contradictions. One way or another, the place for everything dark was clearly defined. Leaving their most dark prejudices, in the Dark Ages, people were able to understand what dark energy and dark matter really are. And even if they did not formulate these concepts a little correctly, they caught the main essence. They became aware that dark energy is not the cause of the observed variability, but its consequence. That is, a dependent complex value, one consequence within another. Science has become more open to new ideas, which has given rise to a surge of pseudoscientific currents, but in return, it has become less conservative and intrusive from more grounded points of view that put pressure on alternative, non-controversial views. More grounded doesn't mean more true. Scientists understood these words in one way, and ordinary people in a completely different way. Thus, the gap between smart and stupid grew exponentially, just as before, between the poor and the rich. 99% of the people of the Golden Era, although they no longer saw the world in black and white, but they did not go far from the people of the 20th centuries. For them, the abundance of information was still poison. However, 1%, the intellectual elite, had a huge superiority in the multifaceted perception and correct understanding of the world around them. For such people, an excess of information is fuel for the brain. But even these elites could not model a conditional vector projection like x, y, in which one could visually determine the cause of the emergence of relativity and the direction of all displacements. Then, they would have learned that gravity works a little differently than in the established opinion. And the general, accelerated expansion of the universe is not something dark there, but gravity is, which can act not only between bodies, but also between space and bodies. It is worth recognizing that such hypotheses were put forward, however, they did not find their support, because they were too raw, unfounded. In any case, the era was extremely eventful and productive. It was during these years that people studied not only our universe, including beyond the event horizon, but also the multiverse, beyond the basic physical interactions. The first attempts to contact the multiverse were carried out more than 2,000 years ago, in the era of dawn, in the form of an experiment with the interference of electromagnetic waves. People understood that their interpretations of that experiment, at best, sound like excuses, not explanations. Nobody wanted to look like a laughing stock by inventing theories for these strange observations, and it was decided to simply use the working equations as divine gifts. David Deutsch proposed linking quantum entanglement to the multiverse through shadow matter. However, his explanations of the connection between ordinary matter and shadow matter were highly controversial. He argued that shadow matter is not capable of interacting with real matter. In his opinion, we see only the illusion of their interaction. An infinite number of worlds, just for the whole slideshow in the space presentation. All the moments we perceive are different realities, which are superimposed on each other frame by frame, uniting the temporal projection. His presentation is original, and attracted a lot of attention, especially in the era of stagnation. But, he could not provide a fundamental basis for his judgments. limiting himself to semi-scientific articles and public speaking. In addition, Deutsch did not have deep mathematical knowledge, and was tied to the laws of classical logic. Although, at the same time, there were broader judgments by Max Tegmark. His bold idea of the 4 levels of the multiverse, in fact, made it possible to find the rules of the game of our existence. Taking for truth the fact that mathematics does not describe our reality, but directly is it. Any non-trivial explanations of the world, including those with the help of equations, are considered a deviation, an optional addition, or, as he called it, verbal baggage. Even then, he realized that the theory of everything cannot be described in any way. It can simply be. Thanks to such a simple concept, it became possible to expand one's horizons to varieties previously inaccessible even in theory. However, people were afraid of contradictory systems to the last, which did not allow them to reveal organized completeness. In the Golden Era, humanity discovered temporary multidimensionality, and learned how to manage it. No, they could not completely subjugate time, but they could modify it. Space-time modifications are too complicated to explain, so we will not go into details. Just know that it has nothing to do with the speed of time passing, its stopping, or its direction. The technologies of the Golden Era are so unimaginable that for the people of the previous era, they would have already seemed beyond fantasy. The most advanced forecasters and dreamers could not imagine in the 40th century that in less than 400 years, at the end of the 43rd century, people would become dumb. They will not speak, but will hear each other mentally. That is, to use 2 types of thoughts, open, available for reading by everyone or anyone selectively, and closed. Not available to anyone except the owner of these thoughts. They will not even open their eyes to see everything around, capturing and perceiving the light with every cell of their body, as if with one large pupil. Even then, they gradually began to understand that the bodies are not of great value. In addition, the more they progress, the less bodies are needed. This is not at all about mechanical and not even material artificial organic substitutes, but about external programs that generate any relativity in previously unimaginable ways. The sequences that make up relativity do not have to have a material basis. The material basis is just one of the many methods for the formation of algorithms to obtain the necessary properties. Called perception. They did not immerse reality in the matrix, but on the contrary, immersed the matrix in reality. They didn't eat, they didn't sleep, they didn't even breathe. They did not move in some sort of matrigolographic flying saucers, not through a banal quantized replacement, teleportation, and not even on kettles that changed their basic state. We are talking about raffinate. The raffinate technology can hardly be called a transport, and at least explain the main essence of its action to people from the 38th century, or earlier eras. These things did not even consist of Cadmian groups. Cadmian properties are separate properties with separate laws of interactions, along with quantum or classical laws, and not from other physical representations analogous to matter, such as antimatter and nutrimatter. They were out of space, and could refine anything. Refining does not move in space from point to point gradually or instantly, but created a new phase of polymering, the relaying of mathematical consequences without reference to physical properties. By generating the right layout within itself in such a way that everything ended up in the right places, without any external or internal relative changes. That is, it moves the structure in such a way that the movement seems to have never happened. As if it had always been the way it was before the actual changes made were. Despite the fact that the refinery had the widest range of actions, they were still local, not global. However, even the creators of the raffinate themselves did not immediately find out about this. Therefore, we can consider it a mechanism with endless functionality. It greatly simplified people's lives, made it ideal. Everyone became practically a god for himself, dictating his fate in advance. Raffinate was used everywhere, not only to move between cities, between houses and streets, or between the walls of neighboring rooms. Raffinate was used even to move individual parts of the body. Let's say you are going to open the most common water faucet in the kitchen. To do this, you do not need to raise your hand and open the valve. You just need to think about what you want to open it. The water will just run on its own. Moreover, the coolest thing is that it's not time that jumped forward, bypassing your actions. In addition, the necessary combination of the arrangement of particles in space was not found. Physically, there were no actions at all, even specifically on the scale of one crane. It did not open, but was simply already open by default, without any previous action, just as if it had not been opened at all. Here, only mechanical valves at that time not used were at all. This is just the most understandable example, to visualize the picture for people who lived in earlier times. You do not think that in the Golden Era, in everyday life, they will use at least something that was used in the Ascension Era? In entertaining fantasy stories, people can carry matches in one pocket and a teleportation device in the other, or ride a horse through a huge spaceship. However, the reality of the present future will not adapt to the savages from the past in order to become more understandable. In the Golden Era, not touch panel sensors used were, not even 3D holograms. Taps not used were, since people did not need to drink or wash. The body could receive water directly from the air, in any portions and at any humidity. And the skin's surface was self-cleaning. Water from external sources was used longer. In addition, these are flowers. Perhaps now, I will scare you a little by saying that houses and streets, cities, and everything that made us civilization in the early eras not used were. With DNA, people have already played as they wanted. They could be as tall in stature as they wished. No one else dyed their hair, because, at any moment, it was possible to easily adjust the content of eumelanin and pheomelanin in them. No one went to hairdressers, the length of the hair was also adjusted, and the hairstyles formed themselves. I did not have to cut my nails, shave, or go to the bathroom. These natural unpleasant needs were simply removed from the organisms as unnecessary programs. Instead of mechanical gadgets, people used their own bodies, which became interactive from head to toe. Virtual images and buttons were illuminated everywhere. Even on clothes that grow directly from the body, even on clean, or better to say, natural skin, just like programmable clothes, it also became a part of the body. It was possible to feel touches on things that were one with the bodies of the owners, even at a distance from them. That is, some overdressed big-mouthed swells, pets of successful men, could just feel their leather handbags, accidentally left in a restaurant. In addition, to feel all the contents in them. For such forgetful dolls, which, as you already understood, were in demand at all times, such an ability is very useful, because their things are usually exclusive, and it is very sad to lose them. At will, clothes could move, creating spectacular images, changing colors, shapes, and material composition. For the inhabitants of the 40s, a completely individual world was spread out on their hands, on their knees, on their chest, on their backs and necks, as well as in the entire space around the body, at arm's length. It was possible to dissolve around him just an enchanting bouquet of bright colors. Virtual images could not only lie on the bodies and around them, but also be their continuation, visually changing the anatomical structure of the bodies themselves. That is, one could no longer look like a person painted with luminous contours, but like a completely different creature. People no longer needed external sources of interaction, for either work or play. Everything was inside their interactive shell. However, against the background of this entire miracle, the refined product stood out especially strongly. He radically changed people's lives. Stronger than anything before. Most were not ready for its wide functionality. Especially for the transformation of their own thoughts. Raffinate could partially make fantasies a reality, moreover, not only desired, but also not desired. Many became paranoid because of this, committed suicide. Often, people were afraid to be alone with themselves, so as not to let their imagination run wild. Then, not infrequently, looking in the mirror, you could see not your face, but a distorted, terrible grimace, like in a real thriller. This is one of the main disadvantages of this technology, which predicts and translates pseudo-changed physical environments by mathematical manipulations. Operating with constants and dynamic sets in such a way that it became possible to plunge beyond infinity in the truest sense of the word. An absolute state generator has no driving characteristics. It does not move by itself and does not move anything around itself, but simply creates something similar to augmented realities that directly or indirectly interact with the main events. Similar technology is used by the Raptites, integrating it into their programmable cities. Another key disadvantage of the raffinate is its inability to move linearly. To carry out linear movement, with 100% accuracy, is possible only from the availability for analysis of the start and finish points, the beginning and the end. Nevertheless, since people did not use full coverage in coding of the world around them like X, Y, they had to use artificial intelligence to approximately complete the distant physical reality. In addition, the farther the distance from the penetrating algorithms of the refined, the more it was necessary to smooth reality. It's like editing a bad quality photo. Raffinate allowed traveling throughout the universe, even beyond the limits of light events. However, already at a distance of 10 light years, it did not convey even 2% of the accuracy of the environment. People could instantly move between the stars, but, in fact, even the nearest planets were only half real, and the other half, they were virtual simulations. Therefore, for the real conquest of other planets, people used the good old spaceships. After all, any activity outside the Earth, through the refinery, would be only partial. This would look funny. For example, if you build a house on some Europa, a satellite of Jupiter, this house will be absolutely normal for you. The way you built it, but for other people, only one wall will stand from your house, at best. Or even a foundation, or a roof hanging in the air. If you build a house on the moon, perhaps it will be detailed enough that you can't find fault with the outside, but you just have to go inside, and you will find yourself in one empty room, where the walls, floor, and ceiling will be faded, barely noticeable shadows, consisting of massive polygons. It is impossible for even two people to see the same picture generated by the raffinate, although just meeting and talking, spending a day on Mars, admiring its desert surfaces, is quite an attractive pastime. People use the refinery for long distances more for entertainment purposes, and for real work on neighboring planets, they sent mechanical robots that were engaged in construction and resource extraction. Real settlers who flew in from Earth in the traditional way noted strong differences between what they saw directly themselves and what they saw earlier through raffinate. However, arriving there, in reality, people could easily move throughout the territory of Mars, refining, as on Earth, and already getting a clear correspondence with reality, since they had the opportunity to use this technology up close. It would seem, how did people manage to create something like this, and then enter the era of another stagnation? And then completely fall into decay? There are no definite answers to these questions. The next one, the era of chaos, my subjective author's name, the original name, the era of rebirth, began in the 44th century, against the backdrop of increasing riots and unrest, which have no basis. In addition, the reason for this was human pride. At the end of the Golden Era, people decided that they had reached the highest level of development. They have become so spiritually enriched that the entire society is able to function without laws, obligations, and any responsibility. They again abandoned statehood, but this time, the Earth did not exist in the form of a single state with basic rules reduced to a minimum, as in the time of Yatov, but had no such concept at all. It was a fatal mistake. One person can live in anarchy, but human society cannot. So the best artificial intelligences repeated in one voice, warning people. The increased ego and self-confidence did not allow people to live by the rules, like savages. They didn't like being held back by anything, didn't like that the AI began to doubt them. After the era of chaos, which led humanity into a protracted world war, the first in 1,000 years, the next period no longer had historical value. He remained nameless. It is not even clear when exactly it started. At that time, no one cared anymore. Somewhere between the 46th and 48th centuries. These are years of shame, years of rapid degradation. Return to basics. To animal instincts and recklessness, in these recent years, the population has declined significantly. Still, diseases returned to people. The population was declining like a plague had taken over the world, even faster than during the war of the last stagnation of the age of chaos. People voluntarily refused medical preparations, software stimulants and other technological influences. Together with diseases, moral decay covered the society. Psychology instantly changed from a leading type to a led one. People have become less likely to analyze information, more afraid. Hence, many prejudices about the dangers of the environment, religious prejudices, social and political fanaticism of successive ultra-liberal and ultra-conservative radical currents. In addition, a passive lifestyle played a role. Although people stopped arranging major military conflicts after the era of chaos, they massively got hooked on degrading hobbies that overshadowed the mind, bringing to the fore the most base instincts, feelings, and emotions. The mental crisis, and the struggle for meaningless ideals, has led humankind to a technological crisis. In just 100 years, in development, they rolled back several thousand years. Depleted earthly resources did not allow to maintain stability for a long time. A new push was needed. Science was not exhausted. She simply did not have time to get out of the impasse into which the war had driven her. Fitting facts and observations to outdated theories that are too narrow and cramped for complex new concepts, scientists have stalled. In trying to dig a hole with an airplane and fly on an excavator, they lost appreciation and respect. In recent years, no one listened to his or her opinion. Separation and misunderstanding between people gradually lowered them to the level of antiquity, ancient Greece in all respects. Old knowledge was either ignored or destroyed altogether, and living in solitude with nature became mainstream. The most sophisticated equipment, supercomputers that control artificial intelligence, space-time converters, refiners, and KDELs were destroyed during the war. Then, about a century later, relatively simple technologies disappeared, such as nuclear reactors, which engineers were still able to reproduce. However, even various groups that despise all the achievements of science and technology deliberately destroyed them. Millions replenished their ranks annually, and one day, they grew on a planetary scale, taking power on Earth into their own hands. At some point, they even coveted artificial satellites, destroying them with an aurimator dug up somewhere, a rare device from the Golden Era, turning space stations into orbital debris. P.S. The aurimator is a weapon that does not move destructive energy, but immediately transforms the destructible object into a chaotic state, simply by mixing it with the environment. This technology works on the principle of a raffinate. Sorry, probably. However, what is. People managed to firmly colonize Mars, the Moon and Titan in an attempt to produce a complete terraforming on them. Visit Mercury, Venus, Pluto, and even fly far beyond the solar system, not partially refining, but completely, for real, with the help of annihilation engines, again, in the golden era of your power. The only city on Mars, called Elon Musk, in honor of a dreamer and innovator of antiquity who loved this planet very much, has grown to the scale of a serious metropolis. It was planned to build a similar city on Titan, called Darwin. However, the golden era ended, and all plans collapsed. People only had time to build small trial settlements there. Not one extraterrestrial colony could not take root. They did not need resources from their home planet to sustain life, but their artificial environment, like in a test tube, is too uncomfortable for not only progress, but also even to maintain stability. People on other planets had to take care of the simplest problems that were not paid attention to on Earth. In their beautiful, protected homes, they felt like fish in an aquarium, and over time, they simply lost interest in such a life. They died out, at about the same time as the Earthlings, from increased depression, and not the desire to leave offspring. The only achievement that has made a clear imprint of our civilization is that the adaptation of the atmosphere of Mars and Titan has been successful. By the year 6200, on Mars, the percentage of compliance with the chemical composition of the air environment is 95.6% of the Earth, on Titan, 99.82%. Guess who made those comparisons? Of course, insectoids. These guys successfully settled on these planets, simultaneously with the Earth. Only, not in such huge quantities, and exclusively for work purposes, and not for permanent residence. About 870 million first settlers arrived on Earth, in the bodies of large intelligent insects, which immediately spread to all continents, even to Antarctica, which is still hot, in places with the most comfortable temperature and humidity. These are the tropics of the equatorial zone. Only 690,000 arrived on Mars, and 1.5 million insectoids arrived on Titan. The surface temperature of Mars, on average, is kept at around -10 degrees Celsius, and on the more distant Titan, +12. On Mars, the temperature has increased by about 50 degrees since terraforming, and on Titan, by 180 degrees. Why such a big difference? The fact is that Mars warmed up only due to the atmosphere, and on Titan, a heating system was organized, due to its own bowels, which was called the Big Boiler Room. The satellite of Saturn, which receives little solar heat, has massive deposits of combustible hydrocarbon compounds inside it. Drilling mechanical robots. For several hundred years, remotely built a huge network of chamber furnaces, connected by millions of channels to each other. Installed computers, acting as thermostats, controlled the injectors that regulated the fuel supply, analyzing the environment, and generating artificial warm winds, which had a directed inertial air circulation, due to the adjacent cold streams. Automated artificial furnaces heated up Titan by 3 degrees annually for 20 Earth years. Then, the heating rate was reduced to 1 degree per year to avoid overheating of the heating complex. After about 1,000 years, the Big Boiler Room stopped working. Computers crashed and completely out of order. The temperature of Titan began to slowly fall, and did not decrease significantly, since then, little time had passed, less than 100 years, before the insectoids arrived here, breathing new, fantastically beautiful life into it. On Venus, people have not managed to make adaptations suitable for life, due to high pressure and a completely unsuitable composition of the atmosphere. What conclusions can be drawn from this? It is a pity that I cannot stop at the golden era and reveal it fully. I cannot talk a pity about the most interesting, because it will become interesting only after thousands of years. Well, and how to be in that case? Time closes my mouth. It says, buddy, no one needs you here. To be interesting, you need to be understandable. We'll have to adapt to the Middle Ages. For some, the history of humankind will seem incredible and exciting, but for someone boring and very mediocre. I described it briefly, one might say, in black and white. Either way, it deserves a mention. Next, you will have to deviate a little from the familiar environment, but this is not a reason to be defensive. Let us finally leave the extinct humanity alone, and turn our attention to more exciting events.